Welcome, brave souls, to Fear File Chronicles, your one-way ticket to spine-chilling stories and terrifying tales. Tonight, we'll be diving into the darkest corners of the human mind with the story. I went to a local trail for a date. Things aren't what they seem here. Penned by the twisted mind of Normal Alfalfa, 8523. Together, we'll explore the unexplained and face our deepest fears. But before we begin, if you enjoy trembling and terror, be sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow fear fanatics and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click the bell notification so you never miss an eerie episode. Your support truly means the world to us, so feel free to leave a comment below to join the Fear File Chronicles community. Now, without further ado, let's unravel the mysteries of the unknown together. As we delve into tonight's fear-inducing story, I went to a local trail for a date. Things aren't what they seem here. Dim the lights and prepare yourself for a chilling journey into the Fear File Chronicles. I made the mistake of sending a risky message several drinks deep on a Saturday night. An ex I dated for 3 years, Claire, was recently divorced, and I'd been trying to work up the courage to reach out. Instead of doing this in a pre-planned, calculated way, I pulled the Hail Mary of randomly messaging and asking how she'd been. I immediately regretted my choice, panicking as I heard my phone chime. Surprisingly, her response was positive. She let me know she's been better, but was doing all right. She seemed open to having a conversation, and we continued to text until I passed out early in the morning. The next day, I woke up, my head pounding and feeling dehydrated. I quickly remembered having a conversation with Claire, but couldn't recall the details. I looked at my messages. I felt embarrassed at how much I stumbled over my words. It was clear I was nervous about talking to her again. In my drunken state, I actually worked up the courage to ask her out. Surprisingly, she agreed, and we were to meet at a local trail that night around 7. I did remember her being pretty outdoorsy, so this suggestion made sense. Although I wasn't looking forward to a hike in the heat while hungover, I was very much looking forward to reconnecting with Claire. I knew she hadn't been divorced long, so I wasn't sure what she was looking for, but I was glad I was at least getting a chance to see her again after all these years. I met up with Claire at the trail as planned. I recognized her silver Honda immediately. She stepped out wearing a pair of cargo shorts and hiking boots. Despite it being 5 years since I saw her last, she didn't look a day over 21. Her shoulder-length blonde hair looked bright as ever, and her green eyes lit up the room, just like I remembered.
"Hi, Aiden,"
said Claire, giving me a hug. I didn't have liquid courage backing me up anymore, so I was extremely nervous. We began walking, and luckily, the conversation was easy. Claire didn't talk much about her ex-husband, thankfully. She seemed to be enjoying her post-divorce life. She recently moved to a townhouse and got a new dog, a yellow lab named Baxter. She also told me she left nursing to pursue graphic design like she always wanted. I remembered the arguments with her family when she started college. They put a lot of pressure on her to go into the medical field instead of anything creative. "I'm glad you're finally doing what's right for you," I told her. Claire nodded. At some point, the conversation shifted to heavier topics, particularly her brother's overdose a few years ago. I apologized to her for not attending the funeral. She was very understanding. We settled into a comfortable silence, taking in the scenery. The landscape of the trail was a beautiful mix of woods and prairie. "When do you want to start heading back?" I asked. It was almost 8 now and would be getting dark soon. Claire didn't respond. I wondered if she heard me. I figured she'd tell me when she was ready, and I wanted to spend as much time with her as possible, so I didn't ask again. I noticed we were past the parts of the trail I was familiar with. The trail led us over a hill. When we got to the other side, I noticed the landscape looked different. Despite being in Ohio, it looked like Washington State Park. Dramatic, tall pine trees lined the landscape, some covered in moss. The tree line was so dense, we were comfortably covered in shade. I paused and looked around. Claire kept up her usual pace, barely seeming to notice. I was surprised I never heard how scenic this part of the trail was. "Damn, this is incredible," I commented, hoping to make conversation. Me and Claire actually talked about taking a trip to Washington many times during our relationship, but never took the plunge. I was always really sad we never got the chance to go. I thought about going on a road trip with friends, but it felt strange to go without her. Claire nodded and continued walking. I paused to take some pictures. Claire didn't stop to wait for me, or even slow down. This kind of annoyed me, but I caught up to her, eager to see more of this section of the trail. We continued walking in silence. The beautiful tree line continued for a good 15 minutes, then seemed to gradually revert back to the normal Ohio landscape. I didn't know what to say at this point. It was clear that Claire didn't want to talk right now. Yet she also didn't seem interested in concluding the hike either. I didn't like the mixed signals. I decided to give her some time before trying to start a conversation. The trees and tall prairie grass seemed to gradually thin out as we continued down the trail. The ground beneath appeared dry and cracked. Eventually, we reached an area that looked like a barren desert landscape. There were even cacti, which, as anyone in the Midwest knows, doesn't grow here naturally. "What the hell?" I whispered. I finally broke the silence. "Did you know this was here?" I asked Claire.
I didn't, but it reminds me of our trip to Arizona,
she said, smiling. I thought back to the trip, smiling to myself. We took the trip our last year together. Even though we were on the rocks at that point, we got along great during the trip, and I thought it would be like a new beginning. Unfortunately, things didn't stay the same once we returned home. I snapped back into reality. I didn't understand how a landscape could change so rapidly. How were plants for a desert climate even able to survive here? Claire was barely reacting to our strange surroundings. I started to worry about her. She seemed despondent. I worried that maybe this was too much for her. It wasn't long after her divorce after all. It also wasn't like she was reconnecting with an old fling. We dated long-term and had a messy breakup. I couldn't even remember the details of what that final argument was about. All I remember clearly was watching her leave and feeling more powerless than I have in my entire life. Eventually, the desert-like landscape gave way to the Ohio landscape I was more familiar with. I stopped for a moment to try to look up the trail to see how far it went. I tried for several minutes, but was unable to get cell service. By the time I looked up, Claire was so far ahead I couldn't see her. I was annoyed at this point. Why would she just ignore me when she agreed to come here with me? It was also getting dark at this point, and I was ready to call it a night. I quickly headed up the trail to find Claire. There was a large pond with some trees and a bench surrounding it. The path appeared to end here. "Claire!" I yelled, looking around. Claire snuck up behind me, causing me to jump. "What the—" I was cut off by Claire's unexpected kiss. She then took my hand and led me to the edge of the pond. She began taking off her clothes as she dipped her feet in the water.
You want to get in?
She asked, winking. I couldn't believe my luck. Maybe this date was turning around. I stripped down to my boxers and followed her into the water. We kissed again. Claire then went underwater. I waited, but she didn't come back up. I could barely see since it was almost dark now. I tried to feel around in the water for Claire. I couldn't find her. I began to panic. I held my breath and got underwater. I couldn't see, but as I swam around, I felt something touch me. I reached out and felt a hand grab onto mine. It must be Claire. I was trying to lead her to the surface when I realized the hand was pulling me downward. I pulled it up, but was immediately yanked back down. The grip on my hand tightened. I struggled to get free, almost breathing in water. Then, I heard a strange noise through the water. It almost sounded like hissing, or maybe growling. My arm flew up as I shot up to the surface in fear. Something grazed my back and I jumped. I turned around to see a human arm, decaying and detached from the body. It even had a bone sticking out the end. I screamed and ran out of the water, falling and tripping over rocks. I began hyperventilating. I called out for Claire several times, but got no response. Had that creepy thing in the water gotten her? I found my phone and dialed 911. Surprisingly, I got a signal. I frantically talked to the operator, begging them to get someone out here as soon as possible. Officers and an ambulance arrived soon after. The first officer who arrived on scene asked for my ID, and I showed it to him. He glanced at it, then back at me. He asked me if I could come with him to the station to answer some questions. I didn't know how to tell him what happened without sounding out of my mind. I was happy to help but wanted to know if Claire was okay first. He was honest with me that he couldn't give me an answer yet, but would tell me as soon as he knew. I rode with him back to the station, and he stepped out for a few minutes to take a call. His facial expression was noticeably different when he returned.
"How did you know Claire?"
he asked. I explained to him that we dated our senior year of high school and the first 2 years after. He asked why we broke up. I sat and thought for a moment. Embarrassingly enough, I couldn't remember the exact reason, just that we grew apart. I told him that. He nodded.
"Did she talk to you at all about her divorce?"
he asked. I shrugged. Not really. I didn't think it was my place to ask. Maybe she was still in love with me, I joked. The officer didn't seem to think it was funny. I apologized. The officer asked some strange questions, like where I grew up and what I did for work. Finally, I got frustrated and stopped him. "Did they find Claire?" I asked. He tried to avoid the question, but I insisted. The officer sighed and began talking.
"Trevor, Claire's been missing for days now. Her high school ex, Aiden, was found dead in his apartment a few hours ago, but his phone, wallet, and several other items were missing. It appeared to be a robbery. But then we found out you made threats to him several months ago. You and Claire were divorcing, and you assumed it was because she was still in love with him? Phone records are showing that messages went to Claire from Aiden's phone at a time that was after his time of death. You lured Claire out to the trail, then murdered her and tossed her body in the pond. For whatever reason, you dressed up in some of Aiden's clothes tonight and called us as him. You must be feeling guilty. Why don't you go ahead and just tell me what happened?"
I started shaking. The officer told me to think back a few days, and I did. I was drinking. I was alone. I looked at Claire's profile from a fake account I made. She'd blocked me immediately after our divorce was finalized. She posted a gorgeous selfie. Tons of thirsty, pathetic guys liked it. I clicked to see the names. Aiden, of course, had. I knew she still had feelings for him. Sometimes I didn't blame her. It's hard to lose feelings for an old flame. That said, I hated hearing about him. When we were moving into our marital home, I found some hand-painted terracotta pots in one of her boxes. She snatched them away from me as I unpacked them. I kept asking where they were from, and she finally caved. Apparently, she and Aiden painted them during their trip to Arizona. Why she would insult me by still having them, I don't know. Sitting at home alone, I fixated on Aiden more and more. I already knew where he lived. I'd figured this out months ago. I'd also figured out his routine. The guy was pretty predictable after all. I watched outside while his lights turned off for the night that Saturday. I entered his apartment with the spare key I had paid to have made by the sketchy maintenance guy. The sedatives I'd laced into Aiden's water jug were clearly working. He didn't stir as I walked into his room. I opened his phone. I knew him and Claire were having an affair long before the divorce. Shockingly, there weren't any messages between them during our marriage. That didn't mean anything, though. I could feel it in my bones that Claire still loved him. I began messaging Claire as Aiden. She quickly agreed to meet up with him that night. I knew it. He's the reason I lost my Claire. Eventually, Aiden began to stir, making me uneasy. With the help of a phone charger, I made sure he never moved again. Claire looked shocked when she saw me get out of Aiden's truck, wearing his clothes.
What the hell?
She asked. Isn't this who you wanted tonight? I'm just being who you wanted all along, I responded.
Where's Aiden? You're insane.
She shouted. I don't remember what happened next, or maybe I just blocked it out. All I remember is walking back from the pond, clothes wet and my face and arms scratched and bloody. The officer snapped me back into reality, asking why I returned on Saturday. The thing is, I couldn't tell him. It was like I was in a trance, living a life that wasn't mine. The officer placed me under arrest. I still couldn't figure out why I went back. In an empty corner of the room, I saw her. Claire. She was dripping wet, her hair and clothes dirty, and a creepy smile on her face. I stepped back, pointing. The officer appeared confused. After I started screaming, I heard him call for backup. I was injected with something. My eyes became heavy, and I closed them. I could still see Claire, even with my eyes closed. Well, my friends, we've reached the end of tonight's chilling tale. I went to a local trail for a date. Things aren't what they seem here, by the talented normal Alfalfa 8523. I hope you've enjoyed our descent into darkness, and that you'll carry a piece of the Fear File Chronicles with you as you drift into uneasy dreams. If our story left you shivering and shaking, don't forget to like this video. Share it with others who crave a good scare, and subscribe to the Fear File Chronicles for more haunting horrors. Remember to hit the bell notification so you're always among the first to know when a new nightmare awaits. As always, we appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Sharing your fears and frights with us truly means a lot, so don't be shy to engage with our sinister community. Until next time, remember to embrace the darkness, for it is within the shadows that our most terrifying stories are born. Good night, and stay scared.